Here in late winter is the optimum time to do some pruning on your deciduous trees and shrubs. It's really the best time for them to work on them, and it's the best time for us to work on them because you can really see what you're doing. We're going to go look at some specific trees and shrubs and talk about some techniques. So we're looking at this dwarf Japanese maple right here, and it needs a little bit of a haircut. I'm here with Josiah Lockhart. He's a certified arborist in Middle Tennessee. Tell me about what we should do about some of this.
Well, Philip, of course, as you can see, we've got some obvious dead wood in here. The tree probably hasn't been pruned in a little while. So what we want to do is, first of all, get the dead and diseased tissue out of the tree to make sure that it can grow healthy. Secondly, is through training and pruning, we want to develop some good layering of the branches. That way we can ensure we have good form. Also, air can penetrate through the canopy, which is going to keep the tree healthy and help it to live a very long and vital life. So, yeah. So the first thing we want to start out with is looking at what is dead and what is not. And this time of year, it's pretty obvious, even though we don't have leaves on the tree, it's pretty obvious we can tell these discolored, grayish colored branches are obviously dead. You can just barely touch them with your finger and they break right off.
Yeah, they do.
So on the smaller ones, what we'll usually do is a technique we just call pinching. We just reach in there right next to the live tissue, just pinch, comes right off nice and clean. If we have a larger branch, say like something like this size or larger, we reach in here with our hand pruners and we're going to line this up directly with the branch collar right there. Make a nice clean cut, just like that. Pull that dead tissue out.
Yeah.
And then that we can heal over from there and cover up. So a lot of times we start out just by pinching these small ones first, get all that out of the way, come to something a little larger. We're going to want to reach in here, make a nice clean cut right at the branch collar, not a flush cut, right at this little ridge of bark, as you can see right there. I'm going to make a nice clean cut, cut that off. Make sure that we've got a good smooth cut after that.
Yeah, because if you cut too close to it, you know, you risk danger of killing this other branch.
Right, right. If we cut into the branch collar, there is all kinds of hormones in the tree that help prevent disease from happening. It also helps to spur wound closure of that pruning wound. So if we cut that area off, we're basically slowing that whole process down and impeding that. So we want to cut just to the outside of that. And the best way to find is you look for the little ridge of bark and you cut just to the outside of that. So we have a little small ridge of bark here, cut just to the outside of that. And then we look for structural branches that might cause the tree to have some crossers that can start rubbing over time, cause a wound on the tree. We want to start developing good structure from that. And so it's a kind of a tedious process, but just one at a time we prune and we take a step back, look to see what we've done. Start with the small ones first, get all that dead wood out of there, and then after a while, it really starts to take shape. We can step back and kind of see what we've done.
Wonderful.
And of course, always look for consistency too. If we have an area of the canopy that looks thicker than the other side, then we might need to go back and adjust and do some more editing on that side to take a branch or two out to make that canopy look consistently formed as much as possible.
Yeah, it's a little lighter over here, but I think that's probably because this is in more shade.
Right, right. So you have the sun effect on it too as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is where the tree has more sun, you're going to get more growth. Well, we can kind of balance that too with pruning, so you have a more aesthetically pleasing plant.
Cool. Yeah, you can really see the structure in the winter right now to get that accomplished.
That's one of the reasons why winter is a great time to prune as well, is because now that the leaves are off, we can really get in there and see what the bones of the tree look like and how we can develop that structure to what we want. So now, Philip, also winter is a great time to be thinking about boxwood maintenance. And as you can see here, we have these two very large mature boxwoods starting to kind of overtake our path here a little bit.
Yeah.
So now would be a great time, since they're dormant, they don't have any new foliage. Let's go ahead and think about what we can do to start to reduce this back and shape it off of this walkway without aesthetically disrupting the look of the plant. So when we look at a boxwood this large, it can be a little overwhelming, but the thing to do is to start out just with the obvious issues. So we have this growing over the pathway. What we want to do, rather than come in here and just shear down the side, which would leave an obvious hole in the side of the shrub, we can come in and reach in a little deeper on this and reach down and prune a little bit deeper into the plant and pull out a piece about 6 to 9 inches off of the top of it. And we can do that in several places and start to work this side of the shrub back, just kind of gently shaping it back until over a season or two of this, we'll start to gradually bring that edge back to where it should have been a long time ago. So if you look, you see these obvious spots kind of sticking out a little further. That's where I'd start with. I want to reach down in here cut it back to a node or a junction, and another branch, just like that. Again, a nice clean cut, pull that out. And when you look at the plant, you don't see an obvious cut. And
Sure.
so we want to do that all the way down this side to start training it back to where we want to try to keep it. And when we do it, we don't just focus on one edge, we want to kind of slowly taper back up the side too, because we want the shrub slightly wider at the base than at the top. So if we have pieces that are sticking out here, it'd be a great spot. Reach down again, add a junction or a node, cut it, pull that out. And you don't even see where the cut was made.
Yeah, and this is opening up the shrub for some internal air.
Right. So with boxwood, we want to encourage depth of the foliage. We don't want the foliage just on the outer plane. So if we shear this with power shears all the time, you're going to have foliage about 2 inches thick. And the inside of the shrub is all going to be pretty much brown dead twigs. By pruning it this way, we're opening it up for airflow and sunlight. So you encourage foliage deeper down into the shrub, which is going to also allow us to be able to reduce it further. But it's also going to help keep disease and fungus and things like that from occurring because you get good airflow and sunlight throughout the shrub.
So with these large oak leaf hydrangeas, I'll constantly get questions when to prune it, when not to prune it, how to shrink it. Mine didn't bloom this year. Give us some kind of an overall view of what to do with these.
Right. So these are the oak leaf hydrangea, and what they do is they bloom on the old wood. So usually by now they've already set their flower buds for the next year. Typically, to reduce these, if I was going to do a big reduction on these, I'd want to prune them probably like July, just after that first initial peak blooming, for reduction. But at this point, what we want to do is just some winter maintenance, maybe some shaping, some deadheading. I love the flower blooms in the winter time, but we're just about time to get rid of those and get ready for spring. So we're going to go ahead and deadhead these, but when we're deadheading, we want to make sure that we're not cutting too much off, because we'll cut our flower buds off for this year if we're not careful. So say for instance, we have right here's a prime example. We have a spent bloom head. We have the flower buds for next year set just back here on the old wood. So what we want to do, if I were to cut this here, I'd be cutting all of those blooms off for the year. So I want to reach in just to this side of the outside of the flower bloom and just take that dead head off just like that, and then this could be discarded. That way we leave that bloom intact, and you're still going to have the full flowers for the next year. So it's pretty obvious when you look at them, these blooms are starting to already swell up a little bit for the year, so you just want to reach in there and cut that off close as you can. Leave about a 1/4 inch or so off that flower bud, and you'll be intact for the next year. And then the other thing I look for is if I have just 1 or 2 branches might be sticking up higher than the others or sticking further out. If I have to go ahead and reduce that back, we might sacrifice a bloom or 2.
Sure.
But for the overall aesthetics of the plant, it's going to be much better to have a more even shape to the shrub.
Great. So we're in another group of hydrangeas. These are the Annabelles, and I know these bloom on new growth, so
Yes.
you can prune these kind of differently. Tell me about these.
Right. So the Annabelles is we usually like to prune those late winter, early spring. It's usually, as long as you get them before our spring flush, whenever they're already set their flower buds. So winter is the best time. Some people do them in the fall. I usually wait because I like the spent blooms to stay up during the winter time.
Sure.
So I will usually prune about this time of year. With these, they're a little easier in some ways, but we got to really watch for those buds because they're smaller than what we had on the oak leaves. So we want to follow this stem down. You see where the old bloom used to be. Follow it down to, 1 foot or so off the ground. You'll find there's a good bud right there, a good terminal bud. Then that will be our next year's growth. So what we want to do, again, we're going to cut just this side of the flower bud, not damaging it, just like that. You can still see that those buds are still intact. But yes, again, say the old flower bloom, find that bud, say right here's a great spot, come down about halfway, and we just cut that off, and you're going to be good to go.
Yeah, and I know some people have discussed cutting these off at the ground as opposed to up here.
Right, right.
So if you cut it here, each of these buds are going to branch, and you're going to get a kind of a branching head as opposed to one big stem.
Exactly. So by cutting it in between the nodes or in between the buds, you're going to get kind of a suckering effect, and it's going to be a kind of a wider, bushier shrub. it's not going to have the same aesthetic value that you would if you cut these at the stem or at another bud. So whenever you're doing that, just make sure, if you're going to cut it lower, make sure that you come down to another bud. Here would be the next choice down.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want to cut it in between. So if I was
Sure.
going to cut here, that would be good.
Yeah.
Right down at the other bud.
So whether you cut these all the way down to the ground or kind of cut them midway, you're still not going to cut the flowers off of them for this year, correct?
Right, because they're going to flush out and then they're going to set their buds from there. So you want to make sure that you cut them low, but cut them right now. Don't wait till after the flush.
Good to know. So these crepe myrtles right here are pretty spectacular, and they've clearly been allowed to grow and really show off what they can do.
Right. It's kind of a misnomer that crepe myrtles have to be headed back every year. As you can see, this is what they would look like if they were just allowed to grow into their natural tree form. This is natchez. It usually maxes out at 25 to 30 feet tall anyway. When allowed to grow and mature, it only requires minimal pruning over time, some thinning to train them, and then occasional deadwooding in the upper canopy usually after that.
I think the important thing to discuss with the crepe myrtles is not to knob them off, not to cut them into the shape that you want them, but to rather pick the crepe myrtle that fits the space for you.
Exactly. Today there are so many different cultivars on the market that are available, and so depending on what site and the space requirements that you have, you can select a species that may not require any pruning, only just minimal maintenance. So whenever you're selecting your species, make sure that you read up on that plant tag and see how big that plant will get, and then it's going to fit the area that you're going to be planting it in.
So we've got some pretty big bald cypress here that are really encroaching on our parking area here. A lot of people would want to prune these back for sure.
Right.
What are some kind of good techniques on that?
Well, again, it kind of depends on your objective. If you're wanting to take them all the way back to the edge of the pavement, or if you're just simply wanting to raise the canopy a bit and get them off of actually sitting on the pavement. What I would probably start doing was identifying where to make my cuts first. And so what we want to do again is not to cut in between these branches, but to cut at a junction. So depending on how much I want to reduce this stem back, I'm going to find junctions to cut at. Here or way back to here would be a great spot, right in this junction here. And again, we don't, internodal cuts or cuts in between branches are just going to rot back anyway, and it's going to cause it's going to be an attractant to disease and pathogens to infect that stem that's rotting. So we want to take it back to another stem. And when doing reduction pruning or subordinating a stem back, it's important to note that we want to cut the stem that we're removing needs to be a third of the size of the parent stem. So if I take this stem back, I want to cut it back to something that's at least a third of the size. In other words, I don't want to cut a very large stem back and leave just a small branch. I want to cut it back to something that's substantial. It's going to look better, it's going to be better for the tree. So we want to identify where to make these cuts, and if that doesn't achieve our objective, then the next step is to take it further back, and that would probably be all the way back at the trunk, and again, just beside that branch collar.
So one of the most important things when doing pruning at any time is trying to reduce the spreading of diseases and infections. What are some ways that you do that?
Right, so before I prune anything, or in between pruning different species or different plants, it's always a great idea to sterilize your tools. It's almost a necessity everywhere you go. If I prune something, the reason I may be pruning it is because it might be sick or have dead stems or diseased stems in it. So the last thing I want to do is take and spread that to another plant or another portion of that plant. So I do that in a couple ways. I keep a bottle of just rubbing alcohol with me. Also keep some Lysol as well. And all you have to do is basically just spray down your tools in between each plant. Spray it off really good, and make sure that give that just a quick wipe with a rag, and you're good to go for the next plant. But it's a great thing with all the diseases that's going on out there to make sure that you're pruning your plants and keeping everything sterilized in between. And also pruning at the right time of year. It's best to prune when it's best for the plant.